The PhD is the beginning of the research actually. We all forget that that is the end of the research, because when you start your PhD only you are starting your formal research. Then after that you are going to guide and you are going to put your input to your students and all those things will happen. So it's the beginning of research only. For a full-time student, this minimum duration is 2 years. So you can get your PhD in 2 years if you are doing a full-time minimum. To be frank, I would expect everyone to publish a paper in their PG dissertation itself, because it's really worth it. And every design studio is a kind of research like for us. Unfortunately, we are not documenting it in a proper way.
Welcome to Thali Talks. This is architect Vidhya Lakshmi from Thali Foundation. Thali Foundation has started to interview architects around Chennai, which will share their experience, and this is done for students community to understand and appreciate the architects around us. This also gives the students community to understand the architects around them and to look into their works and get an experience and exposure from their learning. For this session of Thali Talks, we have interviewed architect Dr. Elango from School of Architecture Planning, Chennai, to share his experience on architecture and his research methodologies and approaches towards it. Most of us would have questions regarding our PhD, how to start it, where to start it, what will be the research question or hypothesis, should we approach guides before we start the process, and how do we go about, what are its rules and about the publications, and so many questions. In this session of Thali Talks, Sir is so very generous to share answers for all these questions, which will help us to have some clarity towards our research process. This discussion will give you some insight towards starting of the topic, like how do you select your topic till the finishing, how do you submit your synopsis. Thali is so happy to interact with you, sir, and thank you so much for spending your time with us to give answers for all our questions patiently. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Elango. I'm working here as Associate Professor, School of Architecture and Planning, Anna University. And I studied architecture undergraduate degree here, 1990-95. Then I worked for a couple of architects' office for 3 years. And after that, I joined teaching in Adiman College of Engineering in the Department of Architecture, which is one of the oldest private engineering college in Tamil Nadu. And after that, I developed the interest, for teaching. Then I understand that, I need to do postgraduate. So I came back again in 2000 to School of Architecture and Planning, and I did my general architecture here. And then 2003 to 2005 February, I was teaching in Satyabama. Then 2005 February onwards, I'm here as a regular faculty, teaching undergraduate and postgraduate students.
How did you develop your interest towards research, and what was your topic?
Developing interest towards research started in my PG program. So thankfully, my batch alone, the UGC has tried something we don't have thesis in our batch. So they started something called a dissertation, where they were exposing us to do only a research part rather than exploring ourselves into a design exploration of the outcome of the research. So my topic at that time for PG was developing a rating system for Indian green building. So at that time only the US GBC established the Indian Green Building Council in Hyderabad. So in 2001 they have announced in Hyderabad, and they are going to develop a new rating system. I was wondering because I was going through that US GBC system, which is completely different from our tradition and culture and the way we do our building. So I started questioning myself, is it going to be the replica of the US GBC as an Indian version, or are we going to do something on our own as a Desi version? So that was my dissertation topic. So at that time onwards, my research into architecture has started. And then that slowly led, when we are in teaching, obviously we need to do a PhD. That is also now become mandatory. Plus you also need to gain more confidence, like now when you are doing your research, uh, because you know that for the next 30 years you are going to be as a teacher. And then to strengthen that, like now I took up extension of the same topic as my research. So that's how it started.
What was your PhD topic?
My PhD topic like initially started with biomimicry. So as we know that the nature is the biggest inspiration for all of us, because the nature can inspire us, it can teach us so many things. It can also use as a tool to evaluate. So I took nature as a tool to evaluate a design process, like because we know that like all the structure which nature can now show us can give a biggest inspiration for all of us. And the biggest inspiration which I took is the termite mound, because one of the building in Zimbabwe was constructed taking that as a inspiration, that is Eastgate building, because we all know that Zimbabwe is a desert nation. Without using any air conditioner, the architect has taken inspiration from this termite mound and then he has done that. So I was thinking like why not we take up that as my research and then convert that into my research area. And then I started with that. And while doing the process, like now I identify that uh, the scope to expand the termite mount may not be that much feasible, because my focus also shifted after that into resource efficiency, because like uh, what you save is like equivalent to what you earn, like because we talk about energy efficiency in terms of saving. So I was thinking like the same energy efficiency can be used as a tool to save. Then the inspiration for me shifted from this termite mounds from the energy point of view to the material efficiency as these honeybee hives. As we all know that this honeybee hives takes like 2/3 of its life to generate the materials to construct the hives. So having understood the importance of that, because like they are generating spending 2/3 of their life to generate that wax to build their hives. So they are very conscious about using that material very effectively. So they chooses that right shape and then the profile, so that like with the minimum material they could able to get the maximum possible result. So I could able to see the relationship between the honeybee hives and then the human habitations, because honeybee hives also like they live as a family and community, and similarly the human beings also live as a family and community, and then we also have individual family, joint family, and then the community living. And then the comfort range of this honeybee hives also closer to that. I was surprised to see that like somewhere around this 28 degrees Celsius with the relative humidity of like 65 to 75%, which seems to be exactly the same as the human being. That made a hypothesis on me. Do architects think while designing a building with reference to whatever output like they are going to give? Are they considering the material efficiency also as an integration into it? So I started linking the efficiency of the material with the design output. So that links my dissertation or my research question, saying that like do architects consciously design, like the honeybee hives consciously design their structure to make sure that like the minimum resource for the given material without compromising the quality. That is what. But here architects like we are compromising on other things because it is available. And these things also begin like strengthen my idea, because when we seriously had lot of power cuts and then the water scarcity during, so we used to plan very well like which all the activities like we do it like when there is a power, which all the activities like we can do it like when there is no power. And then we also conscious about like switching on the electrical appliances. There is also like great awareness amongst the people about the rating system, like you have a star rating system whenever they buy a material or when they buy an appliances, they started looking for that. So all these things like as a consumer like there is an awareness, but as an architect like are we aware of such? efficiency when we do our design output. We normally don't have any methodology to arrive and say like, okay, this is the best design. Because of our experience, we say, okay, this works well. But the complicated profession like medicine, the doctor can able to communicate to the client or the patient that you have some problem like this, so that the patient can understand what exactly is the problem. Unfortunately, there is no such system amongst the architect to tell the people that, okay, given a choice these are the three options I've arrived, in which this design gives you the best possible results with reference to efficiency, material, as well as without compromising the quality of the design. So this was my research topic, and thankfully I could able to relate all those things. And then I coined what are the significant parameters which are associated with the efficiency of the material, because we know that architecture is not the one criteria which we consider, it's multiple criteria. So I arrived around 64 criteria on that, and then I went around the architects. So I categorized into 5 different category. One is like the architects who are having more than 10 years of experience, and then the architects who are having 1 to 10 years of experience, and then architects who are working in government, so that they don't have any clientele pressure or other issues. The fourth category are the teachers who are teaching in architecture, because our profession itself are inculcated into our teaching, because most of the time the design discussions, everything goes as a teacher design discussion, as a client architect discussion, that kind of system. And then the last one is the PG students who are going to be the future teacher, or the architects already, but still they are students. So these are the 5 category, and then I have circulated this 64 parameters to those people, and then trying to identify which all the parameters are playing a relative significance, and which all the related parameters which are associated with the quality aspect one side, another side is the resource efficiency. So we could able to link these two, and then I could able to come out with a research output that around 12 parameters I've identified at the end of the day, which are very crucial, which has directly link with the design process, output of the quality of the design, as well as the resource efficiency. So that was my research output. I could able to contribute that 12 parameters which are going to be very, very crucial, so that we need to consider these 12 parameters. Yeah. Ideal time to start a PhD, I would say that from your PG you can think about it, but you can give a time. The time may be not to take a break or whatever, to think about it, to analyze much better, to interact with your friends and other people. So to get that maturity, I think you require 2 to 3 years after your PG. The 2 to 3 years period will give you more foundation work, because that I missed out actually. So what I have normally done here is I carry my recorded conversation with my friends. Now we generally initiate a discussion on this area, and then we will not be noting it down, because I don't want to get my diversion into it. So I will tell them I'm going to record it. So with my friends, colleagues, and my seniors and my professors here, so we develop a kind of conversation, record all those things, and then go back and listen. So this kind of preparations will give you 2 to 3 years to understand, and then to narrow down what exactly you want to do. So I would suggest probably 2 to 3 years minimum after your PG. But in other academic point of view, couple of institutions in India, mostly in abroad, they give an integrated courses, you join as a PG. If you want, you can extend to a PhD, or you can come with that. So we have couple of people here who have done on that also, and couple of our students now, they are in abroad, where they went for a PG program, and then they extended into a PhD.
In this span of 2 to 3 years, are we expected to publish a paper in a journal?
To be frank, I would expect everyone to publish a paper in their PG dissertation itself because it's really worth it. Unfortunately, the biggest problem with the architect is like no, we are the judge for ourselves. Most of the time, we think like no, it's good or not good or it's not enough and those kind of things. So first, get away from that. Whatever it is, like no, you try to publish a paper. The advantage is that somebody will have an opportunity to go through that because every paper, if you are publishing it in a journal or in a conference, there will be a reviewing committee. So obviously there is somebody going to go through that. If somebody finds it interesting, they are going to appreciate it. If they say like there needs to be some kind of revision, we are going to do it. So you have an opportunity to put forth your ideas to somebody. But unfortunately, most of us are very reluctant to do that. So nowadays, like now, we insist our PG students to publish at least one paper of their research paper before they do it. Many students they do that, and still like now we could see that another reluctance. But we are happy to see that like now at least in a year, some 6-7 papers like no the PG students dissertation they are publishing it at the end of their either in a conference or in a journal paper. They do that. So you should do at least one publication before you register for a PhD. That will give you a kind of confidence. Yes, we can do a research on that.
So as we were discussing, it can be a continuation of your postgraduate dissertation. How do we actually choose a topic? Because if I go for any review committee, they would tell me my topic of interest is broad. I'm not focused, or I don't have a specific area of interest where I can go for a detailed research. So how do I confine to a topic?
So confining of a topic as a process. So we all know that like when you are trying to take a topic, the first one comes into your mind is your interest. What exactly your interest? And second one is obviously your strength. You should do your self analysis and then find out where am I strong. I am strong in analytical area, where I am strong in a qualitative or a quantitative. So these are the two different area and research like normally do it. And quantitative one like it's easier because like you have certain numbers which you can put across to somebody and then it is easy for them to accept it, say yes or no. That's it. Only these two are there. In a qualitative aspect, like you need to build a kind of conversation. For that, like you need to be very aware of what you are strong. So whether you are strong in which area. So your interest has to be understood. So you write it down in a piece of paper. Okay, I'm interested. Okay, in this or this. It's not necessary one or two. You try to write it down at least 3-4, and then you trying to write down your strength. Okay, which are the areas of your strength. The third thing is that the domain. Okay, where exactly you want to do? You want to do it within your context because everything has to be associated with the context. Whether you want to do it in this area or some other area, it can be anything. So you can write it down the third thing as the context. The fourth one is like where it is associated with it, the typology, whether it is architecture, whether it is people oriented, whether it is society oriented. So what kind of typology and where, because like the choosing of the field to collect the data is again going to be very, very crucial because like we can't, research is going to be for some years, like you have to do it in depth. So you need all these 4 parameters. So I would suggest like you write it down these things, 4 or 5. Okay. Once you do that, then the second round goes. The second round is like as we know that research is like research. It is not that like we are going to create something totally new. So we should identify that like what are all the past research in those areas, like your interested area of 3-4 which you have written down. You start searching like using the keywords from that and then start searching and then identify research papers of the past in that. A very important component like which you need to identify in that is, first one is that abstract. That abstract will give you where to start, what are all the process and what is the result. And then the last one is the conclusion. In that conclusion, most of the people would have given that like what is their area of focus which they missed out, or by doing this research they would have identified, okay, this is all the area I could able to contribute, but I can see, okay, there is a scope for further research in this. The third aspect is the limitation. They would say like, no, all my research is limited only to this context and this parameter or this typology. For example, some people may be focusing only on housing, some people may be focusing only on a commercial building, some people may be focusing on an institutional building. In an institution building, some people may be focusing on a school, some people may be focusing on higher education. So the domain can be limited. So everywhere you could be able to see there is a gap in the research. So that gap can be identified one by one. Now you will see a closer proximity between your interest area getting narrowed down from your 4 to 1 or 2 with reference to the gap in the research which you identify. Okay. So that will give you a clarity exactly what you wanted to do, what are all your interests, like already you have narrowed down your interest. From the narrow down of interest, you are trying to identify the past research and then you are trying to come to a conclusion there is a gap, this area where people didn't address. So I want to do that. For doing that, like I would suggest you to take some reputed journals and then restrict your search only to the past 5 years, because every day new innovations are happening, new research, new domain has been added into the existing knowledge. Research or PhD is just you are going to add some new dimension to the existing domain. It is not that like you are going to completely build a new argument here. There is an existing domain. Some people would have addressed some other issue. You are going to understand that either you are going to question that issue and then you will come out with a new solution, or you are going to add, okay, already there is, but there is also some more issue which that researcher is not able to address, and then he has already spelled out in his limitation saying that, okay, I could able to limit only to this area, I am leaving it, the rest to the next researcher, or I can continue my postdoctorate or some other research. The PhD is the beginning of the research actually. We all forget that like, no, that is the end of the research, because when you start your PhD only you are starting your formal research. Then after that you are going to guide and you are going to put your input to your student and all those things will happen. So it's the beginning of research only is the PhD. So you always keep that in mind that like, no, it is not that like we are going to create wonders or it is something which you can't do it. So knock out that from your mind and then think that like, it is a normal process. All we need to do is we need to get into more depth in knowledge rather than broadening our in undergraduate like completely different one. So in postgraduate like we are trying to focus, you try to get into depth. In PhD is much more deeper, that's it. You are trying to understand a simple issue, that simple issue can be understood to the depth rather than broader sense, that's it.
What are the different stages that is involved in a PhD? How do we go through the process?
Every institution call for applications. Normally, I'll take Anna University as an example. In Anna University, like we call for twice a year the admissions, either in January or July. It's an online process. The minimum qualification they say it's a PG degree or MS in research, or some institutions they go for some qualification as prescribed. For example, IIT, they allow students to do PhD directly from an undergraduate under certain conditions. They have to do their undergraduate course in IIT only, and they should get like CGPA of more than 9.2 or something, I am not sure about it. In that case, only IITs are permitting the students to do a direct PhD after their undergraduate. But other than IITs, most of the institutions are requiring a PG degree. A PG degree of minimum 55% or a second class. That is more than sufficient to do your PG. And there are also allowances for SC/ST students as well as physically challenged. I think if I remember correctly, 50% or 5 CGPA they permit. So this is the basic thing. And then online applications will be called, and then you will be asked to appear for a written test. It's an objective type, and the written test, once you are clear the written test, they will call for the interview. In that interview, you have to present your research proposal to the panel members, and then put together of your PG marks, whatever you scored in your PG, that will have some weightage, and then your written test. and then your interview marks. Plus, you should remember that like the earlier I was telling you, we should take like 2 to 3 years of experience to register. So if you have more than 5 years of experience before you come for your teaching, so I think there is a bonus mark. And I also told you before you register for a PhD, try to publish a paper. So if you publish a paper, then you are also getting a mark in that. So all these things are adding advantages. Like before you start your PhD, if you have experience, if you publish a paper, apart from gaining marks, you are also gaining your confidence. So you have advantages on that. So this is the process normally.
Okay. What is the maximum duration that one can take to finish a PhD?
I would say I will start instead of maximum duration, I will start as a minimum duration as a positive note. Okay, for a full-time student, its minimum duration is 2 years. For a full-time student, minimum duration is 2 years. So you can get your PhD in 2 years if you are doing a full-time minimum. For a part-time student, it's 3 years. It's a minimum duration. Since you asked for a maximum duration, I will tell you maximum duration. I think for both, that is 6 years. So under extraordinary situation, the Vice Chancellor of the university can give a maximum extension of like 6 more months, provided that like you are in the stage of submission of the synopsis to write your book, like they are giving you additional time. Since like now is a authority to give that, only he can grant that additional time.
As we all know, architecture is not one single entity. It encloses a lot of other departments coming into an amalgamation. So are we allowed to do a cross-departmental research?
Excellent. Actually, no, as we know that the curriculum of architecture itself, we studied so many courses. We study services, we study sociology, we study like structures, we study so many subjects. We all know that like architecture is not a single domain. So it's a multi-layered domain. So yes, you have to do, because I've seen like a lot of PhD degrees have been done in architecture by people from other domains like computer science, for example. Like today like we are talking about like parametric, so and energy efficiency. A lot of people like they have completed their PhD in architecture from other domains, and here our students also doing like a lot of departmental or multimodal kind of research. A lot of students are doing in transportation engineering, in climate change, and energy department of CEG, and many people are doing in civil engineering in terms of, because I am surprised to see architecture students are inclined to develop a new materials where like they have facilities in civil engineering department, and those people are also strong in that area. I think our university is also encouraging people to do most of the interlinked departmental PhDs, and you don't have to worry about the degree at the end of the day, because as per the UGC guidelines 2016, whatever is your PG degree, you are going to get your PhD also in that. Even though you are doing a PhD in the other department or interdepartmental mode, you are going to get your PhD in architecture and planning only. So you don't have to worry on that.
Actually, I read one paper recently done by professors of mathematics on the proportions of Periyakoi. அவங்களுக்கு இருக்க சம்மந்தமே கிடையாது. ஆனால் அவங்க வந்து முழுக்க studied on the proportions that's followed on the planning principles of Periyakoi, and they submitted a paper.
Yeah, actually the proportions in architecture, they are talking about like the beauty is linked with pi. So we could able to see a lot of research papers by mathematician, and very very interesting research on architecture and mathematics. So where they could able to link, we all know that the best proportion is like 1:1.61. So we could see that like a lot of people have contributed in architecture, the other department people. Yeah.
Is there any methodology, as you mentioned, like in 2 years also you can finish off your full-time PhD. Is that a methodology to be followed to make the process better?
No, methodology I would say right from the beginning of identifying of your guide, because the guide has to be specialized in your area so that she or he could able to contribute. So identification of the guide, because in undergraduate you don't have that option. In postgraduate you don't have that option. Postgraduate you have a little option to choose the area of your domain, maybe a general architecture, landscape, or digital, or town planning. So you can choose, but when it comes to a PhD, it's completely your decision. So you have to choose the right guide. Number one, right guide in the sense, like I'm not talking about the other area. The right guide in the sense, like the person has to be having some domain or a knowledge in that area, specialized in that area. That will help you greatly. So identify a proper guide first, number one. Number two, before you identify the guide, I told you this 3 year or 5 years after your PG to before you register for your PhD, you try to narrow it down, have a clarity. Once you have these two, and I have seen like people have completed their PhD in 3 years time. There are a lot of people like they completed a PG as a PhD in 3 years time. They could able to focus from the word go, right from the word go, because they are focused, because like certain things you cannot change, because like you have to do 4 coursework, number one. Number two, like once you have done your 4 coursework, like you have to do your comprehensive examination. The guide will be asking questions from all the 4 examinations, all the 4 papers, and I think minimum you have to score 7 CGPA in each paper or an average, so to clear this comprehensive. And then these are the basic requirements. And then if you are confident, the guide will conduct this comprehensive examination within 1 year itself. Once you have done your comprehensive examination, from the past research, like you would have understood like what are the methodology, how to collect, what kind of tools like has to be used. So all those things like you will have a clarity, and then that clarity will be confirmed in a guiding committee, which we call it as a doctoral committee. The doctoral committee identification also is as a crucial factor, because the guide has to identify the correct persons as your doctoral committee members, so that they can really contribute to your progress, and they have to tell you whether you are doing in a right direction or not. So your entire travel of your PhD with these 3 people, that is your guide, your 2 doctoral committee members, and then yourself. Only 4 of you will be traveling. So the travel has to be very smooth. If it is very smooth, I don't see any hurdle like that like you cannot complete your PhD within that stipulated time. Many people struggle only in that 4 area. Yep.
So as we are stressing more on the guide, should we meet them before all this process starts and then explain them our idea, then get into it?
It is mandatory, because in the online application form itself, the guide has to give the consent. Only then you can apply.
All the universities?
All the universities. You have to meet the guide, the probable guides, the list will be there in the university website, and then you have to meet them, explain your tentative research area, and then you have to tell them that like this is the area you want to do. The guide has to say okay, he is interested in that area or he is strong in that area. All those discussions has to be done before he or she approves or accept you as a student, the research scholar. Once they are accepting, only you have to put their name as the guide, then only the application will be accepted. So it is mandatory. You have to meet the guide before you apply.
Is publishing a paper in a conference and a journal go through the same process?
No, entirely different. Because the journal publication is a little more tougher and more formal. It is the right one. That's what I was telling you. When you are supposed to refer the past research, means like you should refer only the journal publication rather than the conference publication. Conference publication is just a discussion, informal discussions, and then they give only 5 minutes time or 10 minutes time maximum. Within that 5-10 minutes time, you may not be in a position to express like all your research background and then your conclusion. You could be able to give a glimpse of what exactly you could able to do, because there are like hundreds of people will be waiting in a queue to present. But all the hundreds of the people will be writing a paper, and then you are not guaranteed that all the 100 papers will be published in a journal. Okay, because there is a format, number one. Number two, there is a methodology to evaluate the journal. There is a screening committee, then there will be a pre-editing committee, then it will go to the editors, and then you will have a series of editions. Almost some papers like it take more than a year to publish, and many papers are getting rejected because it is not fitting into that domain. It is not satisfying, because like now you need to see from no other person's perspective, like how a reviewer will see your paper. You are getting into their shoe and then you are writing it down, right? So that is difficult. So publishing a journal is going to be very, very difficult than participating in a conference and then publishing it in a conference publication. But many conference papers are linked with some reputed journals. So what they do is like once the conference is over, they'll ask you to rework on your paper, on whatever you submitted, to submit it to this particular journal according to the format, and then they will have their normal process of accepting it, reviewing it, and then doing it. I would suggest you to see that like is there any association with this conferences, with this journals like IEEE journals, which is very, very tougher all over the world, like they accept. There is very important terminology called impact factor, H index. Impact factor is like how many times the particular journal has been referred by the fellow researchers, right? How many times that has been quoted by their paper as a reference. So that will give you that impact factor. So a lot of journals which is having a very, very good impact factor. I think when you are choosing a paper to review also, you need to see that aspect, like what is the impact factor of the journal, whether it is coming under 4 and all is like really tougher one. And then when you are appearing for this Ph.D. or any interview also, they are making sure that like which paper like you have published, what is the impact factor of that particular journal. So all those things really matter. That is number one. Number two, before you submit your synopsis, you need to submit your paper, and then the paper has to be accepted in any one of those reputed journals. That is what like mandatory. Most of the institutions are making that mandatory requirements that yes, you need to submit journal paper before you submit your synopsis. Then only they are accepting it. Something similar to the conference proceedings, the university is also making 2 minimum presentations to be made with your fellow researchers and teachers. That is number one is like before you do your confirmation. That is your confirmation examination. I told you 4 papers, comprehensive examination. That is number one. At that time you have to present what is your mind, your likely domain, and what exactly like you understood for the past 1 year. That one presentation is mandatory. Second presentation is just before your synopsis stage, because at that time you would have finalized your topic and finalized your research, you would have got some conclusions on. So you are presenting it to a knowledgeable crowd. The knowledgeable crowd may be the fellow faculty members and then your fellow researchers. I would suggest like you also to attend such kind of presentations of your fellow researchers, like while you are doing your research. So that will give you an idea like how they are struggling, where they are finding a path, what kind of results like they are getting, how the questions like from the audience are coming, okay, those kind of things. The biggest difference between the journal publications and then the conference publication, the conference when you are presenting it, there will be questions from the audience, so you could be able to convince them about their doubts and clarification. But in the journal, that will come back to you again, so you have to rework and then you have to submit. So that takes a lot of time. Yeah.
So, as a part of academics now, like the teaching profession itself is demanding for a PhD. So, what will be your suggestion for people who are going to start their PhD?
Yeah, for that purpose only, every university is having a program called part-time to facilitate all the teachers. They are also working, but it is not necessary that like you have to do only the part-time. If your institution is willing to spare you for 2 years, like they can give on a sabbatical holiday of 2 years time, so that like you can go and finish it off and come back. And obviously you are going to be the strength for the institution as well as for the students, right? Because it's difficult to get a PhD faculty members nowadays. But now, like a lot of people are doing, as you rightly said, most of the institutions are preferring a PhD scholars for teaching. And even our school, like now, we made a PhD as a mandatory requirement for entry level itself. Earlier it was only for a professor and associate professor. Now we made it as an entry level itself mandatory for teachers to have PhD as their qualification. So you can gain all your experience in the past, and then parallelly, like you can publish papers with your students. All our design studio effort, whatever you are doing, it's worth of publishing a paper. But unfortunately, we don't.
Have an eye for it.
Yeah, and I would say that like architects, we have a very poor marketable strategy, because we put so much of effort compared to the civil engineers or other people, but they could able to project that. They could able to put it in a proper place and then market it in such a way that that is recognized by somebody. And as a teacher, I think you also agree that like we put so much of effort, so much of preparation, so much of work. The entire semester we are spending on a student, and every design studio is a kind of research like for us. Unfortunately, we are not documenting it in a proper way, and we are not publishing it in a 6 months. Like the guide is struggling with the student, and then the review committee is struggling, and the student is also coming out at the end of the thesis as a flying color. But unfortunately, he is not recording it, or he is not documenting it in a platform where everybody can accept it, everybody can. And I did one of my PhD synopsis paper as my studio project.
Oh,
So I started planning for that, and then that studio project only I published as a paper, and then that was accepted in one of the journal, and then that was the starting point for my last year. We published like 2-3 papers with the students. So even the students are reluctant. So when you are pushing, and as a teacher, like when you are pushing it, and then we tell them like you do whatever you can, and then you put your part in that, and then you are trying to improve that, and then put your maturity of writing, and then because like certain words like which they may not be in a position to tell exactly, and then all these things will add more dimensions to the paper. And then it is not necessary that you target for that high impact journal papers. You can, there are a lot of papers which are recognized by UGC and other people, so when you are going for an interview also, all these things really matters. Yeah, because that will give you more edge over the others, like because you are focused on research, and then you have published more papers, and that will add to your CV. Understand? Because everybody has a degree, everybody has a CGPA, but what makes you to stand out of the rest of the crowd is this, like what you are going to do. Apart from all these things, like UGC and AICTE is encouraging research scholars to give a lot of funding so that they can establish a lab in their in the university or where they are doing a. So you can take up, like a lot of people have done their project as UGC funded one, which is running into huge lags actually. So they submit the project proposals, and then they convert that as a research proposal, and then they submit. So they could able to do both. So they could able to contribute to the infrastructure of the existing institution by adding another lab, and then they also take a lot of funding from the agencies, national agencies. Travel fund, you are talking about, since you asked about like the journal publication, ACT is giving a lot of funding for the people to go abroad and then publish. No, you don't have to spend from your pocket. Like if your proposal is really good, you can apply every year to their web portal, and then if they are finding it like an interesting, there is a panel to go through all those things. Like if they are finding it interesting, they are giving you complete funding for the registration fee, for the travel, as well as for the other. So the funding can be taken from the appropriate agency for publishing, traveling, conference. So you have all the benefits. Yeah, I would say in architecture we don't have that kind of hi-fi laboratories as of now, and we don't see the PhDs like where people are coming out with spending a lot of money with such laboratorical experiments, and you need to buy such kind of equipments. And I told you, either you can apply for this funding to get it from these agencies for the smaller equipments which you want to buy, or with the minimum. I don't see like no, I've spent more money for any of my uh, research. Uh, Obviously you have other regular expenditures, like because your fees and other things, like that is the only thing. From your fees, like your doctor committee members remuneration, everything has been met, so you don't have to pay any money for that. The university is paying automatically, they have their norms, that's it. So I don't, because I spend more money for my PhD, I don't remember. Only for my PG, as a fees I would have paid. Obviously it is running for like 6 years, like every semester, like you are paying only the semester fee, that's it. And then being a teacher in this institution, we got that 50% discount here. So that way, no, we are blessed. So I don't see like I don't remember that like I spend more money for buying a lot of equipments and this that, and some people have done here with the equipments that also they got the fundings. So there's no need to worry about the money which you need to spend for your PhD. Actually, that's a wrong idea. Successful paper, I told you, any qualitative research is difficult to convince the opposite person unless if you are strong in that. We have a couple of faculty members who are very strong in theories and history and those kind of area, where they are very strong in building conversations and then discussions and those area. Okay, so I would say that like if you are not able to communicate properly in those qualitative aspect, difficult. But in quantitative one, it is easier, publishing a paper. But as we all know that architects are very poor in mathematics and those things, so we have to be a little more knowledgeable in that area. You can take help from like statisticians and other people. So nobody is no questioning on that aspect. You can always give a credit to those people. Like in your paper, you can give. See, the biggest problem is you don't give credit to them, then there is a plagiarism and other issues. But whenever like you are giving a credit to any references, any help, any acknowledgement of your juniors, your fellow teachers or your friends, absolutely no problem. The transparency is much more needed when it comes to a PhD, because the biggest threat is the plagiarism, because there are a lot of softwares like now they are talking about like if it is beyond certain limit, acceptable tolerance, everyone knows like then they say it's the biggest problem in PhD is like even the guide is also punished if your paper is coming under that category. He or she, the guide is also been banned by for guiding further students, because the responsibility is on the guide as well as the student both. I understand, because everyone has gone through the fluctuations in life, mood swings, and I told you it's a 6-year duration, which is a long duration, number one. Number two, in the 6 years period, a lot of things are changing in your own domain itself. You yourself will identify, okay, what you started 6 years back is not applicable now, and then you may have to come back. And then the same review committee member would have told you something else, but they also would have understood like after some time like there is a change, or it is not acceptable, or it is not like the way like you understood whatever they were saying. That is all these things will directly add to your output and your mood swing, number one. Number two, I would say we are fortunate as a male. Here that problem comes, because being a female, like a lot of other issues, like most of the people are married, they have kids, a family to look after. They need to do all those work and then also to do their PhD, which adds more pressure. Fortunately, the guys we are isolated from all those things, like and then the family also understood like that okay, you are doing something else, you are in a different phase of your life, and then most of the time your mind also will register your question after some time, because you will be thinking about something else, and that isolation and then that kind of advantages is not there with the a lady teacher, I normally feel pity for that. I would feel sorry also for them, because there are a lot of things, because the age group also, there are hormonal changes, there are a lot of other issues, and everything. No, their mind and priority will go for that first, then the research part.
Do you think you need some special arrangement for ready researchers
A lot of people, what they are doing is like, no, they are taking completely break from here, which is a very, very no, tough decision. They go abroad or they go some other area for 6 months or 1 year, and then they completely focus on the research and then come back here. When they are at home, when they are with the family and all this setup, it's difficult for them, because like the priority changes, you know, for them, and then that happens. So, which is a very, very tough decision to do. Take a complete break and then go for it. Complete your research. Everyone has gone through that process, whether it's a male or female, everyone has gone through that mode swing, fluctuation, and then what has happened in the last discussion may not continue. There are so many things, but I'm telling you that all these things will give you only a clarity to proceed further and further. And I would say that, like, you know, that's okay. I would say that, like, you know, when you are doing your last part, when you are writing your research book, we will do the conclusion part. That's the last part first. Then you come back to the first chapter as you started with your synopsis, because like what you started as a synopsis will not be matching. So when you are doing your writing part also, the conclusion part will be the first one. Okay. Then you come back and see, like, know how you can able to change your research questions, because like, no, 6 years before you started with something else, and then you would have arrived some conclusion after some time. So that's the reason why the first chapter and the last chapter is always going to be very, very critical. In between, like, most of the people will not read, because it is a general process. Like, you have to do a literature review, and you have to do your data, and you have to do a tool or analysis method. Very few people will be doing or interested to see what kind of analysis like you have gone through. In engineering particularly, because they understand from the result whether you have done the research or the data are fake or it's cooked up or something in that. Only those part, like, no, they're interested to see your methodology and then the output. But most of the people, 100% of the people, the first chapter and the last chapter is going to be very important. When you are doing your review, literature review of your research paper also, the abstract part is going to be important, and then the conclusion part is going to be important. So whether there is a link between these two. So even though we say it's first chapter and then last chapter, it's the other way around. No, the process of architecture itself is like a research only. Every project is like a research. That is the reason why the Council of Architecture, even today, they are not insisting Ph.D. as a mandatory requirement for a teacher. Okay, it's only the institutions, like, no, unfortunately most of the institutions are coming under the umbrella of AICTE and UGC. I think UGC has made it from 2023, all the entry level of teachers has to be in Ph.D. So, but having understood our body, the professional body, Council of Architecture, doesn't insist people to go for Ph.D. as a mandatory requirement, because they understood that, like, yes, every project is like a research for you. But having said that, if you are specialized or if you are doing a scientific approach to your project, that will help you in today's context, because today architecture is completely influenced by the technology and technology oriented. So we need to understand the outputs, what kind of benefits like those things are getting, whether to believe or not, like whether you can follow certain design process. Like, this is one of the design process. Like, no longer we can say traditionally we follow certain design process, and then, so we also need to have certain kind of other methodology to approach our design. So obviously this PhD and this kind of research will help you to build your design in a better way, to communicate your design in a better way, to accept your design to the other people in a better way. It is there. Many people, the great architects, there is a team to work on that, to work on the simulations, the mathematical kind of approaches, a lot of things like uh, and thankfully you are asking in architecture today, the energy sustainability and all these things are the qualitative aspect of the research, where you have to prove with the numbers, and then you have to accept your design decisions by opposite person by showing all these benefits and numbers with terms of financial and all those things. Yes, this research is directly helping you. We can see that in the past 10 years, a lot of PhDs now people with teaching as well as practicing architects. We have practicing architects also doing PhD. A couple of my friends now who are not teachers, they are all practicing architects. They are they are also in the fag end of their research. They are almost going to complete the research. But the topic also related to the practice and those areas. No, the world is not expecting anything from an architecture, a PhD or whatever. When you are doing a PhD, you are adding an additional information or additional knowledge to an existing domain. That's all. So in the past, people, every PhD scholar is adding little more to whatever domain which is already existing in that. So that is number one. So by doing a PhD, you are trying to broaden your thinking, and then obviously that will help, because I can see from my own experience that you start looking a problem critically, and then that is what the PhD is teaching all of us, like the same issue has been seen by somebody else in a different perspective, and how we are going to see that, okay, what kind of results like you are going to now show. That is the basis of the PhD. But I could say that there is no trend or whatever, but I could link my previous answer to this question, that people try to see that how I could able to convince the opposite person, whether on a qualitative aspect or a quantitative aspect.
Any research can be convincible, can be useful, that can be successful.
You have to convince yourself first. That will happen obviously, because that is why we are taking more time. So that is, we are our own enemy actually. That is number one, because we don't believe ourselves, number one, and we think that this is not good enough. Let somebody says that whether it's good enough or enough, okay. And before that is what we do. Whenever the client approaches also, we may give 3 options to them, but we would have done 10 options, and then we'll say no, it is not good, no, it is not nice. And then at the end of it, that fellow would have told, okay, this is actually much better option than whatever you rejected, that would have been accepted. Same thing, we all have seen the story what happened to Osho Ashram by office contractor. He has designed so many designs to impress Osho. Finally, he took whatever he has rejected, one of the option, then he went to Osho, and then he explained a black and white concept with the material and all those things, explaining some concept of life and death, and Osho said this is what I wanted, this is what I am looking for. Right, a pyramidical structure, and he started telling the concept. Osho was explaining the concept of Hafiz about what exactly he was looking and how it is. So we think we are the best judge for ourselves, and we make that mistake all the time. So that is the reason why I tell you, whatever you think, you put it to the third person or in a common platform, where it will be viewed by the other people, reviewed by the other people, and you will get a comment from the other people. Let the other person says whether it is good or bad, right? So we don't do that. So we don't see from the other person's perspective. We see from our own, and then we keep ourselves into that. Yeah. So obviously, when you are doing a research and publication, we have to see from the other person's perspective. When you are writing a language also, normal conversation is different. how another person will be in a position to understand, what kind of words like will be doing it. So all these things, a lot of institutes are conducting workshops for all these things. They are not conducting workshops for the methodologies, they are conducting workshops like for these things, how to fine tune yourself and those kind of things, how to put keywords in a right place. So something happened to me. I wrote because to be frank, first time in my life I wrote that book, because we all studied in Tamil medium in a rural places, so it took 3 years for me to understand, people speak English here, okay, in School of Architecture, okay. So that struggle, but once you understand, okay, this is what, and there is no turning back. So you proceed after that, and then writing it in a book format for 300 pages, I never dreamt in my life. So yeah, whatever I thought, this general conversation, with the technical support, I wrote. At that time, the role of the guide is going to be very, very crucial. So the guide having so much of experience, and he has already published a paper, and the guide takes a lot of time, and then he go through that patiently, and then he has to spend allocate his time to you, and then he is the person who writes and then evaluate and then accept or reject, and all those things will happen, and then chapter by chapter, page by page will be built, and then it will be published. And then when you are doing all these things, at the end of the day, an examiner will be somewhere, sitting somewhere, and you don't have any opportunity to meet him and then explain to him, and then he will not have any opportunity to ask you why you have done this. Okay, you have to assume at that time as a reviewer also, and then you have to write down, send it across. If that person can able to understand that, you are lucky. If he is not able to understand what exactly you have written, he will send it back and saying that I don't understand this, okay, these are the areas I need clarity. Then you need to write it back, and then you need to send again. But unfortunately, only once you can do it. Once your paper has come back from a reviewer, only once you can rewrite, and then you can send it back. Second time, if it is rejected, means now all your efforts are waste. So this kind of pressures will add when you are doing your PhD. What will happen? Okay, if it is again rejected, what will happen? Okay, if the reviewer will not accept my paper. This kind of questions. Let it be. Let's take an attempt. So that is missing. Yeah, I would say, since you both are travelers, you both are very much interested in travel a lot. I would say that if you want to travel from here to a longer destination, okay, so if you think about that total journey, it will be tired. You will be thinking twice before you start your journey, but something may push you to start. But I would suggest instead of thinking the end point, obviously in our backup mind, we have to reach the destination. So we take shortcut, or I'm not, instead of shortcut I say short targets. Okay, first let's start from home. Okay, go to Dindivanam stop for a cup of tea. Okay, in this place there will be a very, very interesting place where you can stop for a cup of tea. Then you relax, and then you discuss, and then again you start, and then instead of taking that route, you take some other route, so that you can explore this route. I didn't try, okay, let me take. Or if you are very clear, or if Vidhya is telling no, let's not take any risk, let's go only this route, then already you would have arrived at a certain methodology. You won't divert from that. You will be. Or if you want to take the risk, why not we try some other methodology? So you will start trying some other methodology. Okay, so you always set shortcut or short targets. Okay, and then you reach your final destination. But whenever you do this, keep in your mind that your final destination is where you want to reach. So first target I told you, registration. Before you do registration, identification of a proper guide. When you are identifying a proper guide, you need to prepare yourself well. When you are preparing yourself well, you need to go through at least 50. You are reversing your targets now. Okay, so you are reversing your target. So instead of coming in that way, it may be easier that like no, I need to register for my PhD, that is the first one. But before that, like no, there are smaller targets like which says like no identification of the guide. The guide will expect certain clarity from you. To get the clarity, you need to do this research paper, identify your area of research. For that, like you need to do some homework. How the other person will get more confidence on you. In the same area, I would have published one paper. So all these things will give you that short, targets and say like, okay, that is the first step. The second step will be again like taking up 4 coursework. For that, like you and your guide has to sit together and then shortlist like 6-7 papers which are closer to your topic, and then identify 4 papers. That 4 papers also should be your area of interest, or you want to explore something. So at that time you are afford to take a risk of like learning a new subjects and things like that. That is one side. Another side, like you parallelly you're trying to minimize the gap, to identify the exact area of your research. Okay, all these things, and finally you complete your 4 coursework, and then you understood like from the narrowing it down, your focus is like studied here, and then that gives you the comprehensive presentation. In the comprehensive presentation, the guide will give you that question from all the 4, so that like he or she will test whether you have gained some knowledge apart from your PG courses, plus whether you have also started exploring how to get the data, where is your domain area, which kind of typology you want to do, all those things, how your past researchers have done, which tool like you can choose so that like you can be confident, you will not be struggling, which tool you can choose so that you will not be spending more money on that, or you can afford to do that, or your institution has got a facility, because many institutions has got certain equipments which they would already got. You don't have to buy anything on that. So you can get an idea whether you can use the tools to use that laboratory oriented experiments, okay, so that you don't waste your money on the resources on that, right? And then parallelly you can think like, can I apply for any funding agencies to get some funding so that I can establish like a lab or something which will be useful for my research. At the same time I am going to contribute to my institution. So all these things will come parallel. So everything should have kind of determination, number 1. Number 2, even though I told you a simple example is the registration, it may look very simple, but that requires a smaller targets which you need to, and milestones, all those things. So once you are clear on all those things, and I don't see like any delay, any frustrations or anything. But apart from that, like there are other things which we are not accountable for, which we are not in control of, because many things happen in life. For example, this corona and all those things, like which is not at all in our hand, and that will take its own course. That's it. So we don't have to. So at that time, you just have to be quite accept. Okay, certain things. Okay, this is what life is. I was just watching this series Crown. Okay, past week. Yeah, the Queen used to say that the biggest challenge is keeping quiet and then keeping silent, and because that requires more strength. And I also watched this movie Eat, Pray and Love. I'm sure like most of us would have watched that. In that, like when it comes to pray, like she will come to India. At that time, like the fellow devotees like will be on this Maunavaradam, like they will not be speaking, and they'll say it's the biggest challenge is that like keeping yourself quiet for some time without expressing any of your anger or happiness or whatever, just keeping quiet and accepting the situation and accepting like what it is. I think it requires more of such moments, like when you are doing your PhD. You need to accept certain things and then keep quiet and then sit and relax and then accept and then think, okay, why it is happening, okay, how we can able to do that better. And always like people say that, and even Balakumaran says like when you are happy or when you are sad, you don't take any decisions. Okay, just allow that moment to pass. That's it. because like no, both will be a disaster. When you are taking any decision, when you are happy or when you are sad, it will be a disaster. So all this anger or anxious moment, pressure, everything will be there. Accept it, just relax, and after some time, because you can afford all those things here in PhD, because the time is 6 years, maximum time since you asked for it. 6 years is a huge period, and the 6 years period we are not going to do anything new totally. We are just going to reapproach an existing problem, that's it. And many people are making a mistake by not searching like what has happened already. Half of your job is over already. Like if you start identifying, okay, what is the scope for future research, that component, if you start identifying, already a person has done a research in that area, and then he knows like head and tail of it. In your research also you can quote him, and then you can tell him like, no, already this person has done it, like these are all the observations he has followed. Whereas no, he is not addressing this issue, let me address that. So the researcher also or the reviewer also will not expect you to go again start from the beginning, but he will expect whether you understood like no, what and all he has gone through that, that's it. That is like 10-15 days, like you can go through that, you can understand like no, you can. But most of us are not starting from where he left, and everybody is thinking that like no, we are going to start the race right from the beginning, and then
Reinventing the wheel again.
the biggest problem is all of us are not ready to understand that, okay, where is the limitation column. First slide in our PhD presentation is that limitations only. Any movie, no, first slide is a disclaimer, okay, we are not responsible for all these things, okay. That should be your research, starting part. The disclaimer part, of the somebody else research, we need to pick up. The second slide is that what is the limitation of that and the scope for the further research. You take these two of your area, 50 research paper from this, and then see, okay, if anybody else has addressed no from this. Luckily, this person is not addressed or nobody else is addressed. Yes, I got my PhD now. So that is what many people are failing to do that. That's what we have a biggest problem is our mindset. When you are doing undergraduate, okay, you think a little. When you are doing a postgraduate, like no, you take up your color and say, I done my master's. When you have done your PhD, you think like no, you are something else. Actually, when you are doing your PhD means like no, it is not like going broader. All the PhD, you don't take a broader issue, take a simple issue, take in-depth knowledge on that. That's all. It's not that like no, they're telling you to take more broader. I would say undergraduate is more broader, postgraduate like you are trying to narrow down. PhD, it's still very narrow. Only one problem, that's it. For me, it's material efficiency, that's all. How, whether architects are conscious or not. And my research finding, I said, nobody is conscious. Everybody wanted to do, but it is not their priority. Their priority is like no, something else. Some client comes and says like no, Vastu is my priority. Within that, what I can do? The same 1000 square feet, I would have given a different BOQ for some project and different BOQ for some other project. The profile of the site changes, a lot of other things also. Everyone understood that. But my research finding at the end of the day, yes, what I understood, because I am also an architect, I am also doing practice, I am also into that shoe. My hypothesis is clearly established that like no architect is consciously prioritizing the efficiency. Their priority is something else. But yeah, but it is not that possible that like no, you give priority to the efficiency of the material and forget about the other things. But how do you strike a balance between these two? So in my evaluation marking system, I have overall marking plus the 3 area of domain. So you can tell the client, okay, your design is like scoring 75% overall, or your design is still 65%, it is efficiency in terms of the material, or your design is like 70%, it is scoring less in efficiency but more in the usages and other things. So he can take a call on that. So I could able to get that confidence at the end of the day by doing that research. That's it. So Plus that will directly help you, because why they are insisting PhD for a teacher means like that will help you, to produce more PhDs. Number one, you can add more domains, and your thinking also changes. Like when you obviously you are gaining a additional degree, so your confidence level also has to be boosted, because you are doing so much of effort at the end of the day. That should help you to gain your confidence.
Thank you for watching our video. If you like our video, please do like, share and subscribe our Facebook, Instagram and YouTube pages, and do share a word with your colleagues, friends and fellow architects. If you have a topic that would interest a lot of people, do suggest us through our email info@thalitalks.com, or feel free to call us in 9786 068908. If you want to participate or volunteer in our activities, you can also contact us. Thank you.